Hello Yates County and beyond. Welcome back to another episode of Invasive Species Friday. Through this short weekly podcast, we at the HCCE hope to bring you information about the invasive species you may see around this county. We are in the nest with this week's invasive, European Starling. In the early 1890s, European Starlings were intentionally released in New York City's Central Park. Originally from Europe, Southwest Asia, and Northern Africa, the legend goes that a group of Shakespeare enthusiasts wanted America to have all of the birds the English playwright mentioned in his works. It took a few tries, but eventually a population of 80 birds established, and there are now more than 200 million starlings from Alaska to Mexico. Genetically, starlings across the U.S. are closely related, with individuals sampled from each coast being almost indistinguishable. They can all be directly traced back to the original Central Park populations. European starlings are around 8 or 9 inches tall, with a wingspan between 12 and 16 inches. Weighing about the same as a deck of cards, these birds can reach flight speeds up to 48 miles per hour. They are stocky with short tails, triangular wings, and long bills. Their feathers change with the season. Spring through summer, their feathers are iridescent black, purple, or green, with some white spots, and their beaks are yellow. Later in the year, the starlings appear brown, with larger, more numerous white spots, and their beaks are black. Females tend to be less glossy than the males and are often duller. Starlings tend to flock year-round. When you see a large cloud of birds flying through the air at dusk in a synchronized and ever-changing pattern, this is often a murmuration of starlings. These omnivores are often seen covering lawns with bird feeders, especially in the late fall through early spring, when the natural food supplies are depleted. Much of their diet consists of insects and larvae foraged from the soil, but they also eat berries, fruits, grains, and seeds. European starlings prefer open grassy areas to forage, but need trees or buildings nearby for their cavity nests. Starlings reach maturity at a year old and are monogamous, with annual pairs that last from late March to early July. Males choose a nesting site, typically 10 to 25 feet off the ground, and build their nests by filling a cavity with grass, pine needles, feathers, and any other soft thing they can find. At the back of the cavity, they leave a depression, building a cup for the eggs and lining it with feathers, fine bark, leaves, and grass. The male then sings and flaps his wings in circles to attract a female. If a female decides that the male's nest is sufficient, she will make the final arrangements by adding or discarding some of the material. After they're paired, the male will follow the female everywhere, chasing off other males until the female lays their eggs. Once the 3 to 6 pale blue eggs are laid, the male and female take turns incubating for around 12 days. The nestlings will stay in the nest for 21 to 23 days. Sometimes a second brood is attempted, but the first brood often has a higher success rate. Finally, starlings are very chatty birds. They have around 10 calls in their repertoire, including chattering, trills, guttural rolls, and screeches. However, starlings are also impressive mimics and will imitate sounds heard in their environment. Due to their close proximity to human developments, these sounds often include other bird calls and traffic noises. Some studies have found that with training, starlings can also mimic the human voice. This description of European starlings doesn't sound like they should be on the invasive species list. They sound like many other bird species in New York. We would not have featured them on this show if they didn't have an invasive dark side, though. Starlings are an agricultural pest that cause millions of dollars in damage each year to fruit and grain crops. They also gather at open feeder systems for cattle. A flock of 1,000 birds can eat about 1.5 tons of cattle feed over a 60-day period in winter. This increases the cost of feeding the cattle and can lower the overall livestock weight. Additionally, evidence suggests starlings are a disease vector for several bacterial, fungal, parasitical, and viral pathogens that affect other birds and livestock. Some of those diseases may be transmissible to humans as well. Ecologically, starlings often outcompete native birds for nesting sites. They can be extremely aggressive and are not afraid to chase off larger birds when they find a location they want to use. If eggs are already laid, they will break them open and discard them. Wood ducks, buffleheads, northern flickers, tree swallows, and eastern bluebirds are all native species that compete with starlings for nest space and risk eviction during the breeding season. Female starlings that are unable to find a suitable mate until later in the season often try to lay an egg in the nest of others. Though they mainly sneak their eggs into other starlings' nests, there have been cases of interspecies nest parasitism, where one species ends up raising another species' offspring. To prevent the further spread of European starlings, eggs and nests can be destroyed before the nestlings fledge. Sticky polybutane materials have been developed to discourage birds from staying in specific roosting areas. Established flocks can be frightened off with loud noises or ultrasonic sounds, pyrotechnics, or hawk kites. These are all temporary measures, however, and the birds may come back. If fruit harvests are at risk, netting is very effective for damage prevention, though it can be expensive. If you choose to go the toxic chemical route, remember that non-target birds will often be affected as well. If you have purple martin houses, modifying the entrance to be D-shaped will deter starlings but not impact the martin's use. Using smaller entrance holes for bluebird houses will also prevent the starlings from taking over those nests. If you're having trouble with flocks of starlings roosting on your property, eating your feed, or damaging your crops, reach out to your local extension office. They should be able to give you suggestions for your starling situation. And with that, we reach the end of this week's episode of Invasive Species Friday. Next week, we're in the fields with milkweed's viney cousin. Until then, we at the Yates CCE thank you for tuning in and supporting our fight against invasive species in Yates County.